Hare Krishna, welcome back to our Bhakti Yoga journeys. We are in the midst of this very exciting journey of Narad Muni, and we will continue this discussion further and see what happened more in this extraordinary story of Narada. So, in the previous classes, we saw how the whole episode began with Vyasa's despondency and Narada intervening at the right time. He came and explained to him the reason for his despondency. And in the previous class, we saw the specific instructions that Narada gave, the Sambandha Gyan that Narada gave. And when we become diluted in our understanding of Sambandha Gyan, that is when we see obstacles in our life. So we went through that understanding of the difference between just having immediate targets in life, but the vision should always be very clear, right? And so much of philosophy was shared by Narada, and Vyasa, another philosopher, heard all this, but nothing drives home a point than sharing one's own personal story, right? In fact, we always want to hear the personal stories of people. How did you start your spiritual journey? What was your journey like, right? People always want to know the personal journey. So in this episode now, in today's class, we will see what was Narada's personal journey. In fact, he's going to share his own story now, right? So let me share the screen and we will see the specific. So we are continuing the first canto, 5th chapter from text number 23 onwards, right? And this is how Narada is going to share his own personal story. He says, "O Muni, O wise sage, in the last millennium, I was born as the son of a certain maidservant, engaged in the service of Brahmanas who were following the principles of Vedanta. When they were living together during the 4 months of the rainy season, I was engaged in their personal service." So this episode of Narada has its own little backstory. While here Narada is sharing his immediate previous life, something happened to him even a life before. So 2 lives before being the great sage Narada, he was actually a celestial singer named Upabharana. And it's a long story, but basically he was living the life of the celestial singer who live in a higher dimension, not the earthly dimension. And in that dimension, it is said that everybody was an extraordinary singer, and among them the best was this Upabharana Gandharva. And this specific Gandharva, he was invited once to sing in a particular yagya, a very sacred ceremony was going on, and he was invited to sing kirtan to glorify the Lord. But somehow he was so maddened by the adoration that he was getting, especially from the opposite gender, that instead of singing with the mood of prayer, he was singing with the intention to attract the attention of people around him. And the sages who were there could immediately sense this attitude of him and saying, "Why are you behaving in such a self-centric, in such a miserly way?" Miserly means, usually when we hear the word miser, we think somebody who's very stingy with spending money. But a more deeper meaning of the word miser from a philosophical perspective is one who's stingy with respect to using the resources that they have, the physical faculties that they have. If you're not utilizing them for your spiritual awareness, then that is also a miserly form of life. So because you are behaving in such a miserly way, right? And in those higher dimensions, if somebody needed to be cursed, the way they would curse them is by saying, "You become a human being." And that is how, Narada Muni, he ended up as this human being. And that's the backstory to this. And he was born as the son of a maidservant. Now, this is where, if you compare Narada's life before as a celestial Gandharva and now as this very, in fact, there's no description of Narada's father that anywhere comes. In fact, it is described that he lost his father. He had a widowed mother. So that way he was living a kind of challenged life, a kind of underprivileged life. So if you compare these two births that Narad Muni had, one may ask a question: who was more privileged? Was this Narada, the son of a maid servant, was he more privileged? Or was Narada, the celestial Gandharva, was he more privileged? The Taittiriya Upanishad, when it describes the nature of happiness, it explains there's a whole hierarchy of happiness that exists even in this material dimension. It is said that there is something called as Manushyananda, the happiness that human beings can experience. Right? Among them, a person who is extremely pious, devoted to living a life of religiosity, of piety, of morality, and who's well learned in the Vedas, who has a nice strong body, such a person experiences the topmost happiness, in general. But compared to that person, an unrivaled monarch, a very religious, righteous monarch, experiences 100 times more happiness than the previous person, right? But then, beyond the monarch, beyond the earthly dimension, is the dimension of these Gandharvas. They are specifically called as Deva Gandharvas. Even among Gandharvas, there are the celestial Gandharvas, among whom one was Upabharna. They experience 100 times more happiness than even monarchs. So if you do the math, it's 100 times 100. So the pleasure that, when I use the word pleasure, not in a very physical, carnal sense, but even in terms of their mental peace, overall well-being of life, Narada as Upabharna, the celestial singer, was experiencing 10,000 times better lifestyle than perhaps the happiest person you will see today. Right? And compare that with this son of this widowed, poor, woman who barely could manage to make her ends meet. Right? So who is more privileged? Right? So this particular episode shows that actually, this life of a 10,000 times more powerful lifestyle as a celestial singer with lot of beauty. In fact, they are said to have extremely beautiful bodies with fame and followers and so much prestige, right? All that could not help Narad Muni, right? And that is why all the so-called achievements that we may have in our life, if they are not helping us in coming close to the goal of life, all these medals of honor, right? These medals of honor, if they are not helping us in coming close to the goal of life, those same medals are going to increase the burden on you. Excuse me. That will help you drown faster in this material ocean. Right? It's just some dead weight that will help you drown faster. So that's why we need to really ask ourselves, because many times we also deceive ourselves by giving excuses that, I'm not in the right situation to whatever, to practice spirituality, or in general to work on my own self. We always hide behind different excuses, put ourselves in a very unfortunate, underprivileged situation. My life hasn't been well, I had a real rough life in the last 1 year. This, that, we always like to see ourselves as that victim, right? But who you are a victim as long as you consider yourself a victim, right? But if you can learn to channelize, yes, it is, for example, if you go back to the Bhagavad Gita also, Arjuna went through a serious crisis in his life, but then he used that opportunity, used the crisis as an opportunity to connect to Krishna. And therefore, if you see, Krishna and Arjuna knew each other practically their entire lives. But Krishna never spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. It is only in the battlefield when Arjuna was in the middle of a crisis, that is when he was revealed the wisdom of the Gita. So when was Arjuna more fortunate? When he was living in his royal palace, or when he was panicking in the middle of the battlefield? Which Arjuna is more fortunate, right? So this is the point we need to ask ourselves, that, many times we try to create a very comfortable external situation in our life, and then we give ourselves this excuse that I will take up to my spiritual practices when everything around me is comfortable. Guess what? Life will never be comfortable. That's the nature of, that's the design of this world. In fact, the world is designed to constantly challenge us and push us out of our comfort zone, because that the world is designed to remind us that we don't belong here. So in a place which is not our home, if you're trying to create a home, then such endeavor is just foolishness. Rather, right, start looking at this world like a school where constantly newer and newer challenges are going to come, where constantly we are being pushed to our limits of our learning and grow beyond what we were yesterday, right? So if you look at it that way, then suddenly that spiritual zeal will come. Otherwise, it's very, very easy to get into this kind of a cozy comfort zone. How is life? Oh, everything, all good, all is well, best, good life. Well, that is a very scary situation to be in. So the ideal situation, and it is not that, as spiritual seekers, you should be seeking misery all the time. That's also not the point. But spirituality means to blissfully struggle, right? So struggle is there, but when you understand that this struggle is an opportunity for me to grow, you will seek value in those struggles. And if a particular kind of comfort is going to inhibit your spiritual growth, then such comfort is actually an obstacle, right? So when Narad Muni here is saying that I was born as son of a certain maid servant, right? It may seem like he had some kind of a disadvantage, but look at the power of devotional service. Narada, he happened to get an opportunity to engage in the service of some Bhakti Vedantis, of some people who had this devotional understanding of the philosophy of Vedanta, right? And this so happened that, so in India it is still a custom. So those of you who have been to India or lived in India, we know how when it rains, it really rains, right? It's not like this, like the gentle drizzle that comes. The monsoon season, it's very intense rain. And even today in 21st century, despite all the sophisticated technology we have, one rains are enough to completely paralyze all the metros in India, all the big cities, Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi. One rain is enough to paralyze the whole life there. So traveling becomes very difficult during the rainy season. So back then, therefore, the sages, what they would do is, why make unnecessary extra endeavor? So they would stay in one place during this 4 months of the rainy season. And because now they are staying, they can't just sit and eat all day. They would perform some very intense austerities during this 4 months of the rainy season, right? So there was a lot of tapa, austerity. At the same time, there was a lot of swadhyaya, lot of introspection, lot of study of scriptures, discussion on scriptures, churning philosophical topics. All this used to happen during these 4 months of Chaturmasya. And of course, there was very deep engagement. Ishvara Pranidhana, all the three, Tapa, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, which Patanjali talks about, all three used to happen during this 4 months of the rainy season, right? So during this time, when the sages were stationed in that place, Narad Muni happened to get an opportunity to spend time with them, right? And this is the nature of those teachers, and it's such a rare opportunity when a perfect teacher meets a perfect student, right? So this verse describes what makes a teacher perfect and what makes a student ideal, right? So three important characteristics that a teacher need to have. First, they need to be Vedantis. Vedantis means they need to internalize the whole Vedic wisdom. These teachers they were not speaking from their own mental speculation or some concoctions, but rather their entire worldview was aligned with the Vedas. So whatever they would speak, they would present based on the scriptures. The first characteristic is they should be knowledgeable. Second, knowledge may be there, but they need to be impartial while giving this knowledge, right? And that is which means a teacher should never have biases. Oh, I like this student. Oh, I don't like that student. A teacher can never be biased. So this is also second very, very important. And that's what it says, that they were impartial by nature. So they did not see, oh, he is just a 5-year-old boy. Why I should teach to a 5-year-old boy, right? Sometimes, I mean, even in our classes, when kids come, it becomes very challenging to talk to them, to teach them. And sometimes you even feel like a distraction. You will tell them, you'll tell the parents to very politely take care of the child, but the child wants to ask some questions. And as a speaker, it interrupts your flow, right? I have been there many times in those situations. But somehow, remembering this verse, I always try my best to accommodate as much as possible and try to engage them, involve them in the discussions, and so that's the nature. One has to be impartial by nature. It cannot be governed by their biases. And most importantly, they should be knowledgeable, they should be impartial, and most important is they need to be devotional, which means they should be clear about that ultimate goal of the absolute truth, of transcendence, of Krishna, right? So when these three characteristics are there in a teacher, that's what makes a teacher perfect, right? And then what about a student? So the nature of the student is also very beautifully described. So Narad Muni says that as far as I was concerned, I was self-controlled, right? This is the first characteristic of a student. A student needs to be self-controlled, because the mind can be a crazy place, and we all know how crazy it can be, right? And the nature of the moment you start disciplining the mind will start protesting and give you 101 excuses why not to to attend classes, why not to do your practice, why not to take up to any kind of a spiritual engagement. So, and the nature of the mind is how it is always trying to tilt towards the side of enjoyment. So this is an important characteristic that one needs to have, that one, at least to a certain level, it's not that they need to have perfect control of the mind, but at least certain level of discipline is a prerequisite. Once, Srila Prabhupada, he was asking, he gives this example that, how just like on Ekadashi or some fasting days, when you don't have to eat food, you don't even look at, or at least when you don't eat grains or whatever, on those days, even though the desire to eat grains, especially when you're walking past those sweet shops and all the rasgullas, and I think rasgulla is still safe if they make it nicely, but all those gulab jamuns and jalebis, right? When you are looking at all of those cakes and chocolate lava cakes, right? You may be tempted, but in your head, you tell yourself that, hey, today is Ekadashi, so I should not be eating them, right? So, because you're quite, at least to that level, it's not that you have become completely master of your senses, but at least some kind of a discipline, some kind of a vow you have taken, and that's how you just commit to it, right? So that is the first requirement, that they need to have some level of self-control. Second, he says, even though I was a kid, I was a young boy, I was not frivolous. I was, sometimes kids can be too attached to sports and games and lot of frivolity. So there was he was a very, very sober person, right? This is also another very important prerequisite, because sometimes You will encounter people who have this, who have both these facets in their life, right? What is that expression? uh, Work hard and play harder, if you heard that expression. Right? So when they are so they like to have a particular time of their day or some portion of the week when they are engaging in spiritual activities, and they have a particular time of the day or of their life when they are fully frivolous, right? And you may be wondering, what's wrong? I'm doing my my spiritual activities or whatever. Why the need to have some kind of a sober disposition, right? Well, think about it. Spirituality is not something that you do for only 2 hours a day. It's a whole lifestyle, it's a whole mindset that we need to cultivate. And every action that we do is going to shape our habit patterns. Therefore, when certain discipline is suggested as part of spiritual culture, it is not a restriction, but rather it's a facility for self improvement. Because it is just like like a patient who's just suffering from diarrhea, saying that, hey, I'll take medicines and I'll still continue to eat all the junk food, right? So why the doctors restrict, why they give strict diet plans and so on, is because along with the do's, certain don'ts are also important in our spiritual life, right? And that's where maintaining certain level of sobriety is some soberness is very, very important, right? And then third very important interesting characteristic, in addition, I was not naughty and I did not speak more than required. Alpa bhashini, I would be like, very, right? So what does this indicate? It actually indicates that how, why do we all speak? Think about it. When I say speak, not in sense of like something when you go to office, when you're in a meeting, you have to speak, not as part of that. Why do you think that we get that urge to speak? Because deep down, somewhere, we feel insecure in silence. Either we can't handle the inner craziness and therefore we feel the urge to speak and calm down, right? I'm sure when you're nervous, you'd have seen people, they blabber a lot, right? So somewhere to cover up for that inner restlessness, we tend to speak. Or sometimes, especially in social spaces, we speak because we feel, I don't want people to judge me as being less intelligent. To cover up for our insecurities, we speak, right? So to either cover up our inner restlessness or our inner insecurities, we end up speaking more. But you can see Narada already had certain level of grounding, and therefore he didn't feel to, he was not talkative. In fact, one of the reasons why children are also talkative is because of the inner restlessness. And the reason why grown-ups are talkative is because of inner insecurities. So Narada, on the other hand, he was not like that. He was, he had that, he was sober, he was self-controlled, and at the same time, he was not talkative. And because of this perfect teacher and perfect student coming together, look what happened, right? Once, only once, this only word is very, very important here. Once only, by their permission, I took the remnants of their food. And by so doing, all my sins were at once eradicated. Thus, being engaged, I became purified in the heart. And at that time, the very nature of the transcendentalist became very attractive to me. So just by tasting little bit of the remnants of the food that the Bhakti Vedantis were eating, all of Narada's sins got eradicated and his entire consciousness got boosted. Now, this may seem little bit of an exaggeration for some of us, right? First of all, doesn't eating remnants of food spread viruses and bacteria? Right? So that's probably the first doubt most people would get, right? So I remember the first time I ever experienced this. It felt little weird for me. So then I actually read one episode, in one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples' biography. His own is Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He wrote this beautiful book called A Servant of the Servants. In that book, he writes that how this one time when he was a very, very young devotee, him and his very close friend Vishnu Janaswamy, they were eating together, and Vishnu Janaswamy, he stole one gulab jamun from Tamal Krishna Maharaj's plate and he ate it. And then Tamal Krishna immediately complained to Prabhupada. Prabhupada, he stole my gulab jamun. Prabhupada looked at him, very good, he will make a lot of advancement. Right? And he didn't understand that time, right? Because we may undermine that the potency there are certain things in devotional culture that are considered like steroids for boosting our devotional consciousness, right? These are spiritual steroids, devotional steroids, right? And one of the very, very powerful ones is prasad, right? And more than prasad is called mahaprasad. That prasad prasad is food that has been sanctified once it is offered to the Lord. But once a very, very advanced soul eats that food, because when you come in contact with food, you are investing some of your consciousness into it. So which means now that advanced soul has invested their entire consciousness in that food. And even if you take a small grain of Mahaprasad from their, as a remnant, and after taking their permission and blessings, by the way, right, then that's where mercy flows towards us, and that's how even we get a spiritual boost. There's a beautiful story in this regard. There was a very, very great Bhakti saint named Sripad Ramanujacharya. So this one day he was offered some Mahaprasad, some prasad from the Lord, and he ate that prasad. And there was a little pond nearby, so he put his hand inside that pond and washed his hands. As soon as he put his hand inside, immediately 2 liberated souls came out of that pond. And the disciples of Ramanujacharya who were standing there, they were wonderstruck. Like, what is happening here? What exactly happened? He said, 2 particles of grains which were stuck to Ramanujacharya's hands. When he washed his hands, 2 fish who happened to be in that pond, they ate that. And immediately they got liberated, and they got like a boost. And if you think about it, fish, what consciousness that is has, even in terms of the evolution of consciousness, aquatics have much, much, much lower consciousness than humans. And something from 0, they went to 100%. That is the power of prasad, right? And then the disciple Ramacharya were looking and like, oh wow, this is the power of Mahaprasad. But how come we also ate it many times, nothing happened to us, right? So then, because it's also the mood with which we are accepting it. Do we have that same level? Because the fish, they were non-offensive, they were very neutral, therefore they got full benefit. But sometimes we become judgmental. Really? Come on, these are all just stories, right? In fact, even many practicing spiritualists, right? Those are seasoned spiritualists for a few years, right? Even many times we also have doubts sometimes when the scriptures talk about these extraordinary potencies of prasad, for example, something like that, right? At the same time, you may read one tiny statement somewhere about the power of material energy, the power of Maya. Those statements we take very seriously. In fact, we have more faith in the power of Maya, in the distractive potency of material energy, than we have in the protecting potency of spiritual energy. Or in other words, Many times we are more Maya conscious than we are Krishna conscious. We are more problem conscious than spirituality conscious, right? And this is a big challenge that we all face, right? When you hear, that's why when you hear pastimes like this, right, it will increase our conviction in all these devotional processes, whether it be simple thing like chanting of holy names in japa or in kirtan, right? Taking prasad, listening to devotional scriptures like Srimad Bhagavatam, right? It's a very, very subtle metamorphosis that happens. Even with if you just consistently do this activities, you will see without you knowing, suddenly your whole worldview will change. Your inner consciousness will change. Your whole morale and your attitude, your inner consciousness will suddenly become more cheerful. And suddenly you will feel like, hey, I have always been like this. You will never say, oh, that day on 12th February at 8:34 p.m., that is when I became spiritual, right? You will never feel, you'll never know. It's a very, very sudden, very subtle, gradual change that will happen. But we need to have faith in the potency of these devotional activities. So Narada, by their permission, he took little remnants of the food, and then he became purified. And if you remember in one of our early discussions, we spoke about the different stages of bhakti. We spoke about how it all begins with little bit of conviction, ado shraddha. Then that conviction leads to engagement in association. And if you see that all those stages you will see in Narada's life. In the previous verse, we saw the association, the sadhu sangha part, right? Ado shraddha, then bhajana kriya. And in their association, Narada was very sincerely doing his spiritual practice. And then what happened? The next stage, anartha nivritti, where eradication of all the vices, all the negative proclivities, all the sinful tendencies that happened just by taking the Mahaprasad. Then after Anartha comes Nishta, right? And that what is a sign of that Nishta? His heart became completely purified. Nishta means that firm conviction. You may start with little, shaky conviction in the beginning, but it becomes firm conviction, because what disturbs our conviction are the impurities within our heart, all the selfish tendencies within our heart, all the materialistic propensities within our heart. When all these negativities are cleansed at Anartha Nivritti, then when the heart gets purified, then comes Nishta, and then comes Ruchi, where you start developing taste, attraction to the devotional process. And that's what Narada says. The very nature of the transcendentalist became very, very attractive to me. It's not that he was going to the class every day because his mom was telling him, hey, go attend the class. The Bhaktivedantis are sitting there for 4 months and giving classes. Go there. But rather, he was looking forward every day. Oh, when will that time come when I will go sit in the classes, right? This gradual affinity will start coming. This attraction will start coming, right? And then what happened? Oh, Vyasa, in the association and by the mercy of those great Vedantis, I could hear them describe the attractive activities of Lord Krishna, and thus listening attentively, my taste for hearing of the Supreme Personality of Godhead increased. Asakti. Asakti, it's like a kind of excitement. Attraction is one thing, but excitement is a little beyond. It's like a level up from attraction, right? Now there was a constant excitement towards, he was completely excited about the Krishna Katha, all the stories that he was hearing in the association, right? And as a consequence, oh sage, as soon as I got the taste for the personality of Godhead, my attention to hear of the Lord was unflinching. The taste, the bhava started coming. And as my taste developed, I could realize that it was in my ignorance that I had accepted the gross and subtle coverings, for both the Lord and I are transcendental. Self-realization came about. Can you imagine a 5-year-old boy just spending time for 4 months, right? So our YTTC we spent for 1 month. Some of you spent 2 months. Some of you did some extra courses. We already finished 4 month quota, right? But look at the journey of Narad Muni. A 5-year-old boy in 4 months was able to. This is the potency of devotional service, right? It can nullify all handicaps. Externally, if you see, Narada had a big handicap: one, age; two, his position. He was born in such a underprivileged situation, right? Despite all those, he and no father, nobody to take care of. Mother was struggling to take care of him, right? Economically, socially, from every perspective, he had a disadvantage, right? But still, the power of devotional service was so strong, and more importantly, the power of association is the most important lesson that we learn from Narada's pastime. Because the way devotional service is practiced is in association, and the nature of association is that, right? And that is the role, especially the spiritual master plays. Without that connection, in this case it was the Bhakti Vedantis who played the role of Narada spiritual master. As soon as one comes in contact with the spiritual master very expertly presents, gives that exact right medicine that the student needs, right? And thereby, it's like initially we borrow certain conviction from these advanced souls, but then in the course of time, if we sincerely follow the instructions of the spiritual master, if we sincerely follow the instructions as presented by Srila Prabhupada in all these purports and all the discussions that we've had, if we can sincerely follow them over a period of time, from that borrowed conviction, we will develop our own conviction, right? And very soon, this transformation, this beautiful transformation can happen, right? And then thus during 2 seasons, the rainy season and the autumn, I had the opportunity to hear these great souled sages constantly chant the unadulterated glories of Lord Hari. As the flow of my devotional service began, the coverings of the modes of passion and ignorance vanished. Right? This is the potency of devotional service. Unlike, in many other kind of forms of spiritual practices, there has to be a separate endeavor made to work on to avoiding passion and ignorance. But the beauty of devotional service is such that just by following the different limbs of devotional service, automatically a certain regulation will come, right? Like for example, with respect to food, in the bhakti culture, the principle that is given is that how all practicing devotees, they eat food which is offered to Lord Krishna, right? But then what kind of food Krishna likes? He likes sattvic food. So indirectly, you'll end up eating only sattvic food. So where is the question of rajas and tamas entering into our system? Just by developing that kind of a regulation, just with respect to the food that we eat, right? In fact, food is such a very, very important factor. Somehow today's classes end up becoming a food class, a prasadam class, right? But food is such an important, we undermine the power of food, right? Just like how food coming from a very spiritually surcharged place can surcharge us. Even food that has lot of toxicity and negativity can also influence us accordingly, right? So that is why when we eat food from sources where certain too much of profit motive, too much of greed, right? And if you think about it, most of the packaged food that we have access today, they are not interested in food charity, right? They are interested in making money. So the consciousness that has gone into making that food is to make money. So naturally, when you eat that food, you will also experience that, right? But then sometimes there may be some practical challenges when you're traveling, right? Or whatever situations you may have, you may not always get access to food that you have cooked, or you get from a very legit source, right? So what to do? Does it mean we should completely stop engaging with material energy, right? And extending this to broader aspects of our life. Narada is going to address that also. He says, as he continues, I was very much attached to those sages. I was gentle in behavior, and all my sins were eradicated in their service. In my heart, I had strong faith in them. I had subjugated the senses, and I was strictly following them with body and mind. Right? In fact, Prabhupada writes a very, very powerful statement here. These are the necessary qualifications of a prospective candidate who can be expected to be elevated to the position of pure, unadulterated devotee. Right? First, such a candidate must always seek association of pure devotees. One should not be misled by pseudo devotees. Second, he himself must be plain and gentle to receive the instructions. Right? And so basically that mood, that gentle behavior, is, so usually, what happens is, and of course this is coming from past experience of dealing with varieties of people. People become very, very aggressive in spiritual circles and very, very mild in materialistic circles. Right? But rather, it has to be opposite. When I say aggressive in materialistic circles, doesn't mean you keep fighting with everyone, but rather you stand your ground and try not to get swayed by the onslaught of material energy. That kind of aggression should be shown. And when it comes to dealing with spiritually minded people, one should be open-minded. One should be gentle, as how we discuss in our TTC course, how an ideal student is faithful and thoughtful, right? They do ask questions, they do challenge the teacher to their questions, but not with an attitude of blindly rejecting something, but with a genuine inquiry, with a mood for self-improvement. That's what gentleness in behavior means as a student, right? So as that continued, Narada saw his whole inner consciousness change. As they were leaving, those Bhakti Vedantis, who were very kind to poor-hearted souls, instructed me in that most confidential subject, which is instructed by the personality of Godhead himself. So that Sambandha Gyan that we discussed earlier, which Narada instructed to Vyasa, that same, in a paraphrased way, they instructed to Narad Muni. By that confidential knowledge, I could clearly understand the influence of the energy of Lord Krishna, the creator, maintainer, annihilator of everything. Knowing that, one can return to him and personally meet him. Understanding Krishna as an absolute truth, how he is the creator, maintainer, and destroyer, how I am that infinitesimal part and parcel of that one supreme absolute truth, right? All the Sambandha Gyan that we discussed in the past, that was revealed to Narad Muni, right? And then, O Vyasa, it is decided by the learned that the best remedial measure for removing all troubles and miseries is to dedicate one's activities to the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the essence of all of Narada's teachings, all of the teachings of Bhagavatam, because the nature of devotional service is how it does not want to disconnect you from the world. You don't have to change your outer world. You don't have to change your external setting. Bhakti is all about transformation of the heart, not transformation of your house. Why am I specifically using the word house? Because many times in our newfound over enthusiasm of bhakti, we start changing everybody and everything around us. Except ourselves, we want to change everything. Right? But that's not the nature of bhakti. It's about channelizing our propensities with an inner understanding of devotion. So you don't have to change anything about what you do, just need to change how you are doing it. What is motivating your actions, right? So, and to support that, very beautiful analogy also he gives, oh good soul, does not a thing applied therapeutically cure a disease which was caused by the very same thing, right? A classical example Prabhupada quotes, when you eat too many milk preparations, right? Then people end up, their belly gets upset. So, and people will have diarrhea kind of symptoms. So the way to overcome that is to eat the same milk, but in a slightly transformed way, which is yogurt. So what yogurt does, it gives a lot of healthy bacteria, all the probiotic bacteria that will help in restoring the gut ecology. And that's how, to overcome the problems created by milk, you consume the same milk, but in a slightly transformed way. Likewise, snake venom is used as an antidote for snake bite. But it's not literal snake venom, it goes through little processing, right? So the point here is that, what is this milk? What is a venom here? Material energy is that. We are all disturbed by material energy. The solution is not to give up our material responsibilities and material activities and our material, the tasks that we have been taken up or have been given. Rather, we need to engage in the same material activities, but with a devotional mindset, with the understanding that the same activity can be my connection to transcendence if I know the purpose properly. So being rooted in the Sambandha Gyan makes that purpose very, very clear. Then the very same activity will become the source of your liberation, right? So Arjuna, before the Bhagavad Gita, what was he about to do? Engage in war. What did Arjuna do after hearing Bhagavad Gita? Engaged in war. So in terms of activity, nothing changed. But the Arjuna before Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna after Bhagavad Gita are completely different. In fact, as a solution, at one point, Arjuna thought of running away from the battlefield and giving up his activity. But Krishna chastises him, saying that, no, Arjuna, your solution is your action, your dharma, your responsibility as a warrior is to protect. So you have to engage in this and ensure that righteousness and morality is restored. But use your now skills in my service, right? So this is the important lesson. So what basically Narada is trying to, Vyasa, you have given through in your karma, jnana, dhyana sections of your interpretation, your mentioning of the Vedas, you have so expertly given people how to become, proficient in their activities. But you forgot to tell them the purpose of those activities, right? So that way you are only creating more confusion in their lives. So explain this concept, which I learned from the Bhakti Vedantis. Thus, when all of a man's activities are dedicated to the service of the Lord, those very activities which cause his perpetual bondage become the destroyer of the tree of work. So at a very, very practical sense, what does engaging activities in the service of the Lord mean? Right? Reduce your ego and increase your level of selflessness. Many times we are so centered. Every day our only thought is, what is in it for me? For a change, start thinking about something beyond you. Even if it means thinking about your friend, your family, your immediate neighbor, even that is some level of selflessness. At least even if you start at that level, gradually with strong devotional practice, you will develop the vision to see how, I can directly or indirectly dedicate my activities to Krishna or to the spiritual master. And that way, and it is such a, this mindset, and I can share from my own personal experience, living in GEV for so many years, there's a great sense of satisfaction that comes to me. Because not that I'm an expert teacher, not that I'm doing anything extraordinary. At the end of the day, I can sleep peacefully knowing that I contributed little bit in the bigger mission of the spiritual master, in the bigger mission of all these advanced souls, these pure devotees who have given us this spiritual knowledge. So just aligning our radar with, with the gigantic radar of these advanced souls, it gives great sense of satisfaction. right? And that in itself gives you a great sense of self-worth. Otherwise, we are all, if you think about it, we are all endeavoring so much in our life to earn some self-worth so that I can look at myself in the mirror with some respect, right? Everybody is struggling for self-worth. They're not struggling for money, guys. They're not struggling for fame. These are all superficial. Deep down, we are all looking for self-worth. The problem is we don't know what is real self-worth because we don't know what is a real self. To develop self-worth, you need to connect to yourself. And a connection to the self comes through connection to transcendence, connection to Guru, to Krishna, through spirituality. So therefore, the best way to develop self-worth is by deepening our spirituality and our spiritual understanding and our spiritual realization. And this is what Narada, you gave everything except spirituality to these people in your interpretation of the Vedas, right? Therefore, people are going to become, for the first few years, they may be happy with the success, but very soon they will become hollow and empty. Why are you misleading people? That was the main accusation that Narada made. And therefore, he concluded that unless you teach people this ultimate purpose of life, people are not going to be satisfied. And therefore, whatever work is done here in this life for the satisfaction of the mission of the Lord is called Bhakti Yoga, or transcendental loving service to the Lord. And what is called knowledge becomes a concomitant factor, which means knowledge will automatically come. Bhakti naturally gives knowledge and detachment. You don't have to endeavor for that separately, right? So you focus so much on karma, you focus so much on jnana, but when bhakti comes, automatically karma and jnana automatically come, right? So therefore he says, while performing duties according to the order of Sri Krishna, one constantly remembers him, his name and his qualities. This should be our constant meditation. And glorifying that, he is going to give a beautiful mantra, right? A special, this is one of the Gayatris. Gayatris are, some of you might have heard this name Gayatri mantra. It's not that there's only one Gayatri mantra. There are many types of Gayatri mantras. So whenever you see this expression Dhimahi, right? Dhimahi literally means invest your mind, focus your mind on this, right? So whenever any mantra invokes you to fully absorb and invest your mind, your consciousness on particular aspect, such mantras are all called Gayatri mantras. So this is that special Gayatri mantra. Om Namo Bhagavate Tubhyam Vasudevaya Dhimahi Pradyumnaya Niruddhaya Namah Sankarshanaya Cha. So here, this mantra, Narada Muni is invoking these four very, very special forms of the Lord, known as Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshana. If you remember, in our avatars class, we discussed different kinds of avatars, right? So these are four expansions who are specifically involved with the creation, maintenance, and destruction of this world, right? So he's basically the presence of divinity in this world is through this four special forms. They are called Chaturvyuhas. In future classes, we'll elaborate. There are specific sections of Bhagavatam that talk about them, right? So, so Prabhupada, let's read some important aspects. This is a Vedic hymn or mantra beginning with Omkara Pranava, with the Om mantra. And thus the mantra is established by the transcendental chanting process, namely Om Namo Dhimahi, like that. And then glorifying this chanting of the mantras, he says, thus he is the actual seer who worships in the form of transcendental sound representation the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, who has no material form. Therefore, the highest form of this devotional practice is where one worships the Lord in his transcendental sound representation. The holy names of the Lord are non-different from the Lord. These mantras, they are not just some auditory vibrations, but rather this mantra is a sound embodiment. These are not ordinary, these are very, very special sonic vibrations, which are sonic embodiments of the Supreme Lord, right? And therefore, he says, thus the Supreme Lord Krishna, I was endowed first with the transcendental knowledge of the Lord, as inculcated in the confidential parts of the Vedas, then with the spiritual opulences, and then his intimate loving service. So with that, just by chanting of the names, look, all these things got revealed to him. The knowledge of the Lord, the spiritual opulences of the Lord, and ultimately the prema, the loving service, the bhava, all of those got manifested just by chanting the names, right? Just yeah, actually this particular purport, I'm conscious of the time also, but please read this particular 37 and 38 purports. Very, very nice explanation Srila Prabhupada gives, right? So yeah, so communion with the Lord by transmission of the transcendental sound is non-different from the whole spirit Lord Krishna. Let's break this down. Very complicated sentence, right? So communion with the Lord, which is connection to the Lord through sound, is non-different from connection to the entire spirit of Lord Krishna. It is a completely perfect method for approaching the Lord. By such pure contact with the Lord, without offenses of material conceptions, the devotee can rise above the material plane to understand the inner meanings of the Vedic literatures, including the Lord's existence in the transcendental realm. The Lord reveals his identity gradually to one who has unflinching faith both in the spiritual master and the Lord. After this, the devotee is endowed with mystic opulence, which are 8 in number. And above all, the devotee is accepted in the confidential entourage of the Lord and is entrusted with specific service of the Lord through the agency of the spiritual master. A pure devotee is more interested in serving the Lord than in showing an exhibition of his mystic powers that are dormant in him. Sri Narada has explained all these from his personal experience, and one can obtain all the facilities which Narada obtained by perfecting the chanting process of the sound representation of the Lord. And amazingly, there is no bar for chanting this transcendental sound for anyone, provided it is received in a disciplic succession or the parampara system. So that para sound, when received through parampara, can be practiced by anyone. And that is the most powerful way of tuning our consciousness, of elevating our consciousness and connection to transcendence, like that. And thus, therefore, he describes, therefore, glorify the activities of the Lord. You have described the Vedas very nicely, but write a book which can glorify the Lord. And under that inspiration, he compiles the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, if you look at the entire Narada's journey so far, he got it pretty easy, you may say. 5-year-old boy spends 4 months, eats little prasad, hears classes, tada, life is perfect, right? No. Bhakti never came super, self-realization never comes easy. It has never come easy for anyone. We still haven't seen the crisis that Narada had to go through in his life. In the next discussion, we will see life was not all so rosy for Narada. He had to go through a major crisis in his life. But because of his devotional acumen, he converted that crisis into a beautiful opportunity. That entire story we will see in our next discussion. All right. So these are a few thoughts which I wanted to share. If anybody else wants to add something, if you want to unmute yourself, ask some questions, type in the chat box, please feel free to do so. Go ahead, Apurva.
I wanted to ask, like, there are Gayatri mantras in Srimad Bhagavatam, like the first verse also of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, but I've heard that we should not chant Gayatri without getting initiated in it. So, are we allowed to chant the Gayatri mantras mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam?
So, yeah, so there are basically 2 kinds of mantras in the broad sense. The first mantras are universal mantras, like the Hare Krishna Mahamantra that we chant. That anybody can chant without any initiation. Right? Then there are other mantras which have certain star conditions applied in terms of how you chant, when you chant, what state of consciousness you chant, which time of the day you chant. There are certain rules and regulations for that, right? So this specific Gayatri that Srimad Bhagavatam recites, right? Because it is already in a, and also you need to understand every mantra has a presiding deity, has a presiding devotee who gives that mantra, right? And they decide the dynamics of that mantra. So in this case, the fact that Vyasa put it in writing and present it for the whole, masses means this particular form of Gayatri and even the first verse that you mentioned, they are accessible for everyone. So that way you can see Vyasa has initiated us in this particular mantra by writing it and making it public. So by the blessings of Vyasa, we are entitled to read these mantras and recite these mantras. However, there are certain other Gayatris which have, which has to be received from a spiritual master under Diksha and it has to be chanted under certain rules and regulations. Those Gayatris are also there, they are different. Do you plan to start chanting this new mantra?
Yeah, first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, I like to chant.
Yeah.
I wanted
all these shlokas of Bhagavatam, because Bhagavatam is non-different from Lord Krishna. As you are memorizing these verses of Bhagavatam, you are coming closer to Krishna. You are remembering Krishna through these verses. So yes, so please go ahead without any hesitation.
I was also about to ask the same thing, Prabhuji. The last line of that purport, that these mantras have provided this comes in disciplic succession.
Right.
It is not applicable to the Maha Mantra, right?
Yeah. So the Maha Mantra, well, even Maha Mantra has to be received in disciplic succession, right? Because what happens is, see, the mantra has certain potency, but that potency has to come through a certain mood. The parampara gives you the mood, right? Otherwise, there are certain traditions where certain mantras are used for certain material benefits. So, because a mantra is only potent based on the mood with which you give. That's why the connection to the parampara, the teacher, the guru is very, very important. Right? Okay. All right.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, please.
It was from the previous class, like we hear that Lord Shiva can give us liberation. But Srila Prabhupada mentions in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that Lord Shiva affirms that only Vishnu can grant liberation. So how can we reconcile these two things?
Can a pure devotee award liberation?
Yes.
Yes, by the grace of the Lord.
Okay.
And Lord Shiva is the greatest devotee. So why he cannot award liberation? In fact, if you say Lord Shiva cannot award liberation, you are questioning the Krishna that way. Right? So, yes, so Lord Shiva is, in fact, he is, of course, by the potency of Lord Krishna, Lord Shiva has, you can say the power of attorney for giving liberation. Right? But he awards that for those rightful souls only. He will not award it for selfish-minded demoniac beings. All right. Okay, so let's end our discussion here. Thank you all so much. We will meet again next week, continuing this more extraordinary journey. You thought it's all over, but the real twist in the plot is going to come in our next week's class. So please join us again next week. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare